Indulging today in another of my most favourite pastimes, that is to say, long walks, reflecting upon history and nature and all things of a ethereal nature. And today, I would like to address a very significant feature from the historical past that took place around here near to Devizes, and this time I'm dealing with the English Civil War of the mid 1600s, and very close to where I am now a very significant battle took place. In fact, it was the probably the most significant victory carried out by the Royalist forces under King Charles I, although they eventually went on to lose the war a couple of years later. But in 1643, in the hills behind me, a couple of miles from here actually, on the other side of town, but countryside that's very much like what I'm walking across now, we had Devizes Castle, which is still there, but not the original one. That was pulled down, but there's a folly there now, which has been turned into posh people's flats. Devizes Castle was the central place and a royalist stronghold, and it was under siege from the heights originally of Roundway down, which, as I say, is a couple of miles behind me in the distance there. I often walk up there actually, and it's probably virtually the only battlefield in Great Britain, almost, that's virtually as it was at the time. Very unusual for a battlefield in the United Kingdom, but that's the case. Anyway, Devizes Castle under the Royalists was under siege from the parliamentarian forces, and they were firing their cannons down into the town. In fact, a cannonball from one of those parliamentary cannons is still embedded in the rafters of the St John's Church in town, by all accounts. Anyway, Devizes managed to send out a distress signal which got to the king in Oxford, which had become the central headquarters for the Royalist forces, and he dispatched a relief force to relieve the town of the siege. And when they approached the forces of the parliamentarians under William Waller up on the hills above Devizes, Roundway down, and they engaged, and the Royalist forces were vastly under strength. The parliamentarian forces far outnumbered them, but a great battle took place, and it went backwards and forwards for quite some time. But in the end, the Royalists, the Cavaliers, as popularly known, drove the Roundheads off of the heights of Roundway down. This was in July 1643, and they drove them in a state of panic and rout over what has since been called the Bloody Ditch, because hundreds of parliamentarian cavalry rode blindly in the long grass and did not see the Bloody Ditch, a 300-foot drop. And so all those horses and men went tumbling down into the Bloody Ditch, and it was a terrible slaughter. And it signalled basically the end of the battle. The surviving parliamentarian forces were driven from the field, and it was a terrible slaughter, and ended up as a very great victory for the Royalists, which they were able to celebrate. They went on to take the port of Bristol shortly afterwards, and it all seemed to be going fine until, of course, finally the parliamentarians under Oliver Cromwell, they won the battle, more than the battle, they won the war. In 1645, First English Civil War came to an end, and the king, Charles I, was captured and put on trial, and incredibly and hugely significantly for British history, was beheaded in January 1649. And it was after that that Oliver Cromwell refused the crown. He said he had just fought a war to remove the country of the scourge of monarchy and royalty, and he instead took the title of Lord Protector and more or less acted as a king anyway. And that was the case for quite some years. Great Britain became a republic until Cromwell died and his son Richard was not capable of leading in the same way his father had been, and the monarchy was restored under King Charles II, Charles I's son, who had been in exile, and he was brought back, and everything got quite jolly again for a while, apart from the fact that they dug up Oliver Cromwell's body from Westminster Abbey along with a couple of his henchmen and put them on trial and beheaded them for regicide. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. At the moment, I'm just talking about the Battle of Roundway Down. As I say, it took place on the heights above me, a couple of miles from here. And it's a wonderful place to visit if you don't mind walking, because it is a long walk. And I'm enjoying this walk. It's really beautiful here. Thank you, and good afternoon.